Before we begin, look around you. You wake up in a house you don't fully own. You drive on roads you didn't build. You rely on electricity, water, internet, banking systems, hospitals, platforms, none of which you control. And every month, without negotiation, without ceremony, you pay. Not because a king demands tribute, not because a knight stands at your door, but because access itself has a price. And that raises a quiet, uncomfortable question. If survival depends on assets you don't own, if stability depends on payments you must keep making, if freedom depends on staying solvent, then how different is that from feudalism? Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide, and where progress is rarely as linear as it seems. When most people hear the word feudalism, they imagine castles, swords, armored knights, peasants bound to the soil. It feels ancient, primitive, obsolete, a relic of a darker age replaced by modern freedom. But feudalism was never really about castles. It was about control. In medieval Europe, land was everything. It produced food. It provided shelter. It guaranteed protection. It defined survival. If you controlled land, you controlled opportunity. If you didn't, your choices were narrow, no matter how hard you worked. Peasants were not trapped because they lacked effort. They were constrained because they lacked ownership. So they entered arrangements that were stable, predictable, and profoundly unequal. Labor in exchange for access. Loyalty in exchange for protection. Rent in exchange for survival. It wasn't chaos. It was order. Feudalism endured for centuries not because it was barbaric, but because it was stable. Everyone understood their position. Mobility was rare. Ownership was concentrated. And security mattered more than freedom. That detail often gets erased from modern storytelling. Feudalism did not collapse because it was inefficient. It weakened because something temporarily became more powerful than land. Capital. Industrialization shattered land's monopoly over survival. Factories replaced fields. Cities replaced manors. Wages replaced fealty. And for the first time in history, people could generate income without owning the foundational asset. This was revolutionary. You no longer needed inheritance. You needed skills. You didn't need permission. You needed employment. Ownership still mattered, but access to wages created breathing room. And that breathing room changed history. The 19th and 20th centuries produced something historically rare, a broad middle class. Wages rose. Ownership expanded. Homes became attainable. Savings accumulated. Productivity gains translated, imperfectly, but meaningfully, into better lives. For a moment, it seemed permanent, but it wasn't a new default. It was an exception, because ownership never lost its power. It simply changed form. Land transformed into corporations. Property became financial instruments. Infrastructure became balance sheets. Assets multiplied, abstracted, and scaled. And gradually, quietly, ownership began concentrating again. Not through conquest. Through markets. No banners. No declarations. No villains. Just incentives. By the late 20th century, the logic of the system shifted once more. Capital became global. Assets appreciated faster than wages. Finance expanded beyond supporting the real economy and began restructuring it. Housing stopped being primarily shelter. It became an appreciating asset class. Education stopped being preparation. It became leverage purchased upfront and repaid over decades. Infrastructure stopped being public utility. It became an investment vehicle, and access to what mattered increasingly required continuous payment rather than ownership. The old obligations returned in new language. Not fealty, but debt. Not servitude, but subscription. Not land tenure, but permanent rent. The vocabulary softened. The structure remained. If there were a gold medal for economic euphemism, modern systems would still stand on the podium. Because what replaced feudal obligation wasn't complete freedom. It was conditional access. You can live anywhere, as long as you qualify. You can move, as long as your credit allows it. You can participate, as long as you remain solvent. Choice feels like freedom, even when all options require payment. Here's where the comparison becomes uncomfortable. Feudalism wasn't defined by cruelty. It was defined by dependency without ownership. And dependency doesn't require castles. It only requires that the essential assets of life are controlled by someone else. The medieval serf depended on land he didn't own. The modern worker depends on housing, infrastructure, platforms, financial systems, assets he doesn't own. Different tools, same logic. And just like medieval feudalism, the modern system doesn't need to be malicious to be durable. It only needs to be normalized. Most peasants did not revolt daily against feudal order. They endured it because alternatives were scarce. Today, when people feel trapped, it's rarely because of legal restrictions. It's because of prices, because leverage has shifted upward, because access has become conditional, not by decree, but by structural drift. And before we debate fairness, sustainability, or morality, we need to understand how this happened. The system did not announce its transformation. It evolved. As ownership reconcentrated, risk transferred downward. Stability was prioritized over mobility. Financial structures multiplied. And once that pattern becomes visible, the parallels are difficult to ignore. Because feudalism did not disappear. It adapted. Hierarchies rarely return through declarations. They return through prices. As capital mobility accelerated, assets gained power over production. Appreciation outpaced wages. Ownership captured gains more efficiently than labor ever could. Productivity increased. Technology advanced. Output expanded. But ownership absorbed disproportionate rewards. Those who own appreciating assets accumulate leverage automatically. Those who rely solely on wages run faster to stay in place. The system doesn't punish effort. It simply rewards ownership more. Debt fills the gap, not as a malfunction, but as a mechanism. When wages cannot keep pace with asset inflation, credit bridges survival. Mortgages replace land tenure. Student loans replace apprenticeship. Consumer debt replaces savings. Each framed as opportunity. Each binding future labor to past prices. A medieval peasant owed labor to land he did not own. A modern worker owes labor to obligations already signed. Different century, same gravity. Mobility isn't legally restricted today. It's economically constrained. You can move cities, change industries, reinvent yourself. But restarting grows more expensive each year. Miss a payment and access tightens. Nothing symbolizes modern freedom quite like needing approval to exist. Some argue this comparison stretches too far. That modern life offers choice. That opportunity persists. And technically, that's true. Feudalism 2.0 isn't about chains. It's about dependence. The medieval serf couldn't leave because survival required land. The modern participant can leave, but only by abandoning access to housing, credit, healthcare, stability. That's not overt coercion. It's conditioning. And it works because it feels normal. People don't revolt against rent increases. They adjust budgets. They don't question asset inflation. They chase returns. They don't confront ownership concentration. They internalize blame. Modern hierarchy doesn't demand obedience. It incentivizes compliance. And when crises appear, inflation spikes, bubbles burst, liquidity evaporates. The response follows a familiar pattern. Assets are stabilized first. Liquidity flows upward. Losses are socialized. Structures are reinforced. If there were a gold medal for systemic consistency, this discipline would dominate. Ownership is protected. Dependence is managed. This is not moral outrage. It's structural observation. And once seen, modern anxiety becomes rational. People feel productive, but precarious. Employed, but exposed. Free, but dependent. They intuitively understand